persistence. That's been the key for me to be successful with pita. Now, I don't think I ever shared it, but a couple years ago, I attempted to make pita bread at home. It was a much different setting than what you see right now, and suffice to say, it was a big fail. I think I had rolled it out really thin, baked it a little too long, and everything was crispy and flaky instead of soft and fluffy. Well, I'm a much better cook now, and this homemade pita bread came out so naturally and so easily that I'm 100% sure that if this is your first attempt, it'll turn out perfect too. There are some things to keep in mind, so I'm going to tell you everything that I've learned to get perfect pita and the pocket with it. Now we start with the yeast. I've added in some lukewarm water and sugar, food for the yeast. You want to whisk that really well and then let that sit. Let the yeast start to bloom. Let that just breathe. Now, keep in mind, as you whisk it, you will start to see bubbles as the yeast starts to basically fart out air. And if you don't see bubbles, the yeast is dead. Throw this away, get some better, fresher yeast, and start again. Now, I am using a combination of all-purpose flour and whole wheat flour. In this case, it's atta flour, which is like a blend of whole wheat flour, but you can use straight up whole wheat as well. I'm doing that because whole wheat just has a bit more flavor, but I want the softness that all-purpose flour brings. So I'm gonna add the two flours in my stand mixer here, along with my other ingredients, starting with the yeast water from earlier. And if you see anything that's residual in the bowl, just put the rest of your water, because we only used half, remember, for that yeast. Use a bit of the rest, put it in that bowl, swirl it around, and put that in there. Start mixing this, and then slowly keep adding in your lukewarm water until there are no dried bits of flour at the bottom and the dough actually starts to come together. And when it comes together, stop the mixer, add in your salt, put it back on for about 30 seconds to a minute until that salt is incorporated as well. Now, something that I learned a bit later on is to save time and save a bit of frustration, add the olive oil in the dough at this stage, not when the dough is coming nice and smooth, because then it just takes longer and it's a bit harder for the oil to be accepted by the dough. So with just a bit of help to the dough, just turning the slick side from the olive oil inside out, the dough has accepted the oil completely if you did add the oil later on. And at this point, you want to take it and work it and stretch and fold until you get a nice, smooth, and soft dough. Now, working it like this helps develop the gluten, and it just helps to get a bit of that chewy texture, and I really love that in any bread that I make, really, with all-purpose flour. It just adds so much to the texture. At the end, you wanna just form it into a nice tight ball like this, and then cover it with a damp kitchen towel and leave it for about hour and a half. Make sure it's in a warm place, and if your oven has a proof setting, then that's what you want to do. It is gonna double in size once it's done proofing, and now you want to break this up into your portions. Now, if you divide this one recipe for this pita bread into 8 pieces, 8 equal sizes, then you're gonna get some small pitas. But if you do it into 4, then you're gonna get some large pitas. So you can get a bit of scale. You'll see from the B-rolls earlier and at the end what the sizes are. So if you really wanna go between any of those sizes, then you can portion your dough out as you want. But whatever size you pick, take your portions and then form those into a ball, and then let that rest for about 5-10 minutes. Now, after you form these into these balls, just prepare your work surface. Dust a bit of flour, and that's going to help make sure nothing gets stuck. And you want to now start to kind of loosely cover the dough balls, your portions, with the flour on each side, and then pat it down. You don't want to roll it out right now, because once you portion it out, lightly pat them down. You want to let them rest, because it's going to help the rolling process or the stretching process much easier. That's perfect for the oven to finish preheating, which needs to be at the highest setting that your oven can go to, most likely 500 Fahrenheit. Now, the key to getting perfect puffed pita breads is to really keep the heat, that hot temperature, inside the oven. So don't open it too much, and a baking stone or a baking steel really helps with that process. Technically, you can also bake the pita bread with a baking sheet by baking it on the back side of it. That works, but just the stone and the steel is much more preferable, because I already have it. It just lives in my oven, and it just gets way hotter than a baking sheet would, because it retains heat. Now, if you do want to make it on the stovetop, don't you worry, we'll take a look at that too. Now, after you've let these patted out portions rest a bit, now it comes time to roll. And the key here is to just roll very lightly. I have this wooden rolling pin, so I do have to put some pressure, but if you have those heavy marble ones, then just be a bit more mindful, because the pita breads, for them to puff really naturally and by themselves without like patting it down like you do with a tortilla or a roti, it needs some heft, some girth, some thickness, and you help it by rolling it kind of thick, and it's almost like an eighth, maybe a quarter of an inch thick. I would just advise that you do a tester so that you get a sense, and you go thicker or thinner based on your oven, your flour, and your rolling technique. But about a quarter of an inch, a bit thinner than that, worked well for me almost every time, and I'll tell you when it did not work. Now, before you get too excited, once you have rolled your pitas out, don't put it in the oven or your pan or your baking sheet yet. Cover it again with your damp kitchen towel and let that sit for 5 to 10 minutes. It'll just help the dough to relax, the yeast to do its thing, and just make it lighter and more likely for it to puff up. Okay, game time. Now add your rolled out portions in the oven and then just let those rise. This is the case where I had the oven on for too long, so the big one didn't really puff that well, but the small one puffed perfectly, and that's the key. So the second time when I did it, I just left the pita in there. I didn't open the oven at all, and I just let it rise, and look at that. And that happened again and again. And that's how you get that perfect pocket in the middle, because it has puffed perfectly throughout, and that's going to help it be aerated and soft as well. Now, for those looking for a stovetop method, this is a cast iron tawa pan. You can use a cast iron too though, the traditional kind. And the thing with this is, unlike an oven, the heat is only at the bottom, so it's not really perfect for it to rise from everywhere all at once. It really depends on hotspots on your stove, your pan, and you can see that it has started to rise on that right side there. But for me to really help it rise completely and really have a proper pita with the pocket, I had to pick this up, put a wire rack directly on the stove, and then use the direct heat and the wire rack to help finish puffing it up. Now, in case you have made rotis or tortillas, then you know exactly what this is. But people who haven't done this, it's completely safe. Doesn't matter if you have an electric stove or a gas one. If you have induction though, you're out of luck. Then you have to like figure out something with the pan itself. But look at this, it's puffing perfectly, and that extra direct heat is just enough for that perfect puff. Look at that steam coming out, right? And look at this awesome basket full of homemade pita, and they're all just so good, except that one or two where I learned about the heat setting, where I have to keep the oven closed. Remember, keep that oven door closed, but puffed or not, they're still super delicious. And we are one step closer for our perfect collection of recipes to make homemade shawarmas. We have our toom, we have our pickled veggies, and now we have the homemade pita bread. Next up is going to be the homemade shawarma chicken, and I really can't wait for that. Check this out. I'm going to open that. That's the one that we did from the stove earlier. And the pita pocket. The fluffiness, the good stuff. It's all right in there. And having it fresh, the amount of flavor that you can get from the homemade version, it's bar none what you get at the store. So there's nothing for you to lose. It's very easy. And I'll see you on the next video. Hopefully you're following everything for the perfect homemade shawarma. I'll see you on the next one.